Hello, this is Cheryl, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 18th issue of the Washington Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the headlines, Hezbollah ignites blowback from its base as over 1 million flee war with Israel. The militant group's attacks on Israel have sparked anger even among its most loyal Shiite supporters in Lebanon, weakening its clout as the war widens. By Suzanne Hadimos and Mohammed El-Chama. Beirut. Shiite Muslims in Lebanon who form Hezbollah's base of political and popular support are increasingly furious with the Iranian-backed militant group for dragging them into another war, as Israel carries out waves of airstrikes and plans to intensify ground operations. Hezbollah's launch of rocket, drone, and missile attacks on Israel to avenge the death of Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has drawn a fierce response by Israel, which in turn has forced more than 1 million people to flee, many displaced for the second time in less than 2 years. We did not even change our clothes. We fled in our pajamas. I had women and children with me, said Ali, who had to leave his home in Marijoun in South Lebanon and is now staying with family in Beirut. Ali, who spoke on the condition that he is identified only by his first name because of the risk of retribution, said he felt blindsided by Hezbollah's decision and the humanitarian crisis it created. The rising public anger is saddling Hezbollah with double-layered existential challenge, even as some Israeli officers vow to use the current war to destroy the group militarily. Hezbollah's leaders are at risk of losing political legitimacy within their base, as displaced residents fear that South Lebanon could suffer the same fate as Gaza Strip and end up largely reduced to rubble. The Shiite community is caught between a rock and a hard place, and now faces a reckoning, said Filippo Dionigi, a professor of international relations at the University of Bristol and author of a book about Hezbollah. They see Hezbollah as the organization that has represented their interests and their security, Dionigi said, but they are also realizing that Hezbollah is leading them into conflicts that exact a very high cost on them. A non-state actor needs some legitimacy to exist, Dionigi added. If that is missing, it turns only into a self-interested organization. Hezbollah has long relied on political support in predominantly Shiite areas, including South and East Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut, where it supplanted the Lebanese government as the main provider of basic services. This popular support propped up the group even as it faced criticism or outright opposition from domestic rivals over its operations in Syria and Yemen, and the support continued through wars with Israel in 2006 and again in 2023-2024. But the decision in early March to attack Israel, handing the Israeli military easy justification for a new aerial bombing campaign and targeted operation by ground troops, is eroding the loyalty among Shiites in South Lebanon that once seemed unshakable. The government in Beirut has also hardened its stance against Hezbollah, demanding the group disarm and cease its military activities. Several people interviewed by the Washington Post expressed bewilderment at the decision by Hezbollah's leadership to attack Israel and voiced dismay that the plight of the population seemed to be disregarded, especially during the holy month of Ramadan. They didn't even think about Ramadan, that it was nighttime and that it was in cold weather. They didn't think about the people, said Hadi Morad, a local Shiite doctor who opposes Hezbollah. The night the war expanded to Lebanon, he rushed to evacuate his patients from a town in the country's east where Hezbollah holds sway. Hezbollah's decision to enter the war is being criticized even by the group's long-standing supporters. Ghada, a Shiite woman who is still looking for a place to shelter in Beirut and who also spoke on the condition that she be identified by her first name because of potential retribution, said she always supported Hezbollah publicly. Now, however, she questioned the point of trying to avenge the war against Iran, seeing no benefit for Tehran or the Lebanese people. The price we paid was not enough, Ghada said. displacement, destruction, and devastation. In addition to the more than 1 million displaced, nearly 1,000 people have been killed since the start of the military hostilities, according to Lebanese officials. Many of those forced to evacuate have nowhere to go, either because shelters are full, rents are too high, or landlords will not rent to them. Many are forced to sleep in their cars or in tents. Recently, Israel has targeted locations housing the displaced, including hotels and the public beach, saying it was targeting Hezbollah and Iranian officials. Hezbollah joined the war less than 24 hours after Iran confirmed the death of Khamenei, sending a salvo of rockets and drones into Israel, much of which was intercepted. Even Hamas, Hezbollah's Palestinian ally, seems sick of war and unwilling to stoke a new conflict on behalf of Iran. In a statement Saturday, Hamas urged Iran to stop firing at Persian Gulf countries and try to find a peaceful solution. In Lebanon, cracks quickly began to show in Hezbollah's support. At a cabinet meeting hours after Lebanon was dragged into war, the group's main political Shiite ally, the Amal movement, led by Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, voted in favor of a decision banning their military activities. The government so far has been unable to enforce that decision. In a matter of days, Israel issued successive evacuation orders for South Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut, triggering a new wave of displacement similar to that of 2024. Some Lebanese have taken in displaced family members. Lynn Harfouche is now housing 17 members of her family. I remember that I started calling my family and telling them they have to leave the southern suburbs of Beirut immediately. They were stuck on the road for 4 hours. Harfouche said that most of her family had long supported Hezbollah, but that misgivings had been rising even among the recent decision to drag Lebanon into war. She herself is a former supporter of Hezbollah who broke with the group in 2006 to help lead a secular opposition party. The effects of the exodus could be felt across the capital as schools were converted to shelters, roads were clogged with cars, and the displaced were lighting garbage on fire to stay warm. At one Beirut shelter, Murad, the doctor, treated an elderly woman with diabetes whose legs were severely swollen because of how long she waited in traffic to get to safety. To be sure, Hezbollah still enjoys support in the Shiite community. In addition to its military arm, it has a political wing that for decades has provided its supporters with basic services, including education, loans, health care, and housing. Many residents do not believe the Lebanese government is capable of doing the same. Hezbollah has asked its base to remain patient and steadfast, but many wonder how the group can expect such patience when even the Shiite religious authority asked the displaced to not seek shelter on its property before finally relenting 2 weeks into the conflict. Supporters have been growing unhappy with Hezbollah for some time now. The fall of the Assad regime in Syria cut off Hezbollah's direct support lines from Iran, and a new Lebanese government has clamped down on the group's sources of financing, making it increasingly hard for Hezbollah to rebuild after the 2024 war. There were also frustrations with Iran. At a Q&A for a book signing by Iran's former minister in Beirut this year, one partisan chided the minister for his country's lack of support during the last war with Israel. Additionally, many supporters said the group's recently named leader, Naim Qassem, lacks the charisma and respect of his predecessor, Hassan Nasrallah, which gives him far less legitimacy in promulgating war against Israel. Who could not love Nasrallah, Ali said. If anyone from our community said so, they would be lying. Now it's over. We need to live. After the 2006 war with Israel, Nasrallah spearheaded a massive reconstruction campaign of the southern suburbs of Beirut and South Lebanon. Under his leadership, the group propped up Bashar al-Assad's regime in neighboring Syria, and after the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, Hezbollah struck Israel from the south of Lebanon, aiming to pressure Israel into a ceasefire in Gaza. While the Lebanese government opposed those moves, it was unable to stop them. Hezbollah, meanwhile, retained the unquestioned support of its loyal Shiite base. Supporters defended Nasrallah at demonstrations, on talk shows, in workplaces, and on social media. This time around, none of that support has been apparent. He stepped into some big shoes. Qasim was always Nasrallah's deputy, and perhaps still looks like it in front of the eyes of the Shiite community, Dionigi said, adding that he lacks any military wins that would earn him the respect Nasrallah enjoyed not only within the Shiite community, but regionally as well. Harfouch said that although people's view of Hezbollah has soured since the start of the war, prolonged Israeli bombardment could reverse that. People were angry and were furious with Hezbollah, she said, but Israel's blanket evacuation orders did not help. It really touched everyone, and it touched them deeply. An Israeli invasion of South Lebanon may foster more resentment. Already, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has warned of a prolonged displacement, saying Shiite residents could not return to their homes south of the Litani River area until the safety of the residents of the north is guaranteed. Also, for now, given Lebanon's fragile sectarian political system, there seems to be no alternative for Hezbollah's base. Shiites who have tried to challenge Hezbollah in the past have been targeted and harassed, including Morad, who ran against Hezbollah in municipal elections last year. If Hezbollah does not end militarily, there cannot be a fair confrontation between the Shiite opposition and Hezbollah, he said. While a ceasefire has yet to gain momentum, people like Gadi have had their lives upended and are in limbo. Our young men and children have died and are suffering from hunger and oppression, Gada said. Fear God, fear God. Enough is enough. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Washington Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Continuing from the headlines. The voting bill Trump says will secure victory could backfire. The Save America Act's effects are unpredictable, but changes in voting patterns could make more stringent requirements a problem for Republicans. By Amy B. Wang, Scott Clement, and Lydia Sidholm. President Donald Trump has ramped up pressure on Republicans in recent weeks to pass the Save America Act, a bill that would require people to provide proof of citizenship to register to vote and to show photo identification at the polls, among other voting restrictions. Trump has gone so far as to declare that he will not sign any other legislation until Congress passes the bill, and vowed Tuesday never to endorse anyone who voted against what he dubbed one of the most important and consequential pieces of legislation in the history of Congress. He promised Republican lawmakers last week that passing the bill would guarantee the midterms for the GOP. But the bill might not help Republicans as much as Trump thinks. It is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. Requiring Americans to prove that they are citizens when they register to vote in an effort to root out the extremely rare cases of non-citizen voting would throw up roadblocks to the polls for millions of eligible voters across the political spectrum, and in some cases could hurt Republicans more. What would the bill do? The version of the bill the Senate is considering this week would require people to provide proof of citizenship, such as a passport, birth certificate, or naturalization documents, to register to vote. People would also need to show certain government-issued photo IDs at the polls. In addition, the bill would all but eliminate mail-in voter registration and voting. The bill also instructs states to hand over their voting rolls to the Department of Homeland Security, raising privacy and surveillance concerns. States would be required to check their voting rolls against DHS's SAVE database, and those voters flagged as ineligible would be removed from the rolls every 30 days. Beyond the voting-related aspects, Trump has demanded Congress pass an expanded version of the legislation that would bar transgender women from participating in women's sports and restrict gender transition care for children. If passed, requirements in the Save America Act would go into effect immediately. How would the Save America Act affect voting? Everyone would need to present a photo ID to cast a ballot, but the bill would have the greatest impact on the registration process. While the bill does not explicitly require everyone to re-register to vote, a significant number of currently registered voters could be asked to provide documentation to remain on the rolls. Others may have to re-register because of a move or name change, and this registration would need to take place in person. An analysis by the Washington Post found that a greater number of Republican-held congressional districts have at least 5% of residents who would need to re-register to vote because they are considered inactive voters. That means they failed to verify their address with election officials, haven't voted in 2 or more consecutive federal elections, or have no valid or current address on file. In about 54% of Republican-held congressional districts, at least 5% of residents would have to re-register to vote, more than 36% of Democratic-held congressional districts in which at least 5% of residents would need to re-register. About 21 million U.S. citizens of voting age, 9%, do not have or lack easy access to documents proving their citizenship, according to a 2023 survey conducted by the University of Maryland's Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement, Vote Writers, and the Brennan Center for Justice. About 2.6 million Americans of voting age, 1%, do not have any government-issued photo ID, while 34.5 million, 15%, do not have a driver's license or official state ID card that has their current name and address, according to the survey. Under the Save America Act, student IDs and other state licenses or ID cards would not be accepted. As many as 69 million married women in the United States do not have a birth certificate that matches their legal name, according to the Center for American Progress, and they could face additional hurdles if they need to register to vote. Much of the real-world impact would ultimately depend on how states implement the verification requirements, whether they already collect proof of citizenship from voters, for example. We would likely see significant variations in implementation across 50 states, said Michael Pomonte, a research fellow at the Claremont Graduate University who has studied state election policy and voter behavior. Would this hurt Republicans or Democrats more? Trump claimed last week that Democrats, who have been opposed to the Save America Act, were doing everything possible to fight it because they know if we get this, they probably won't win an election for 50 years. The president's assumption is partly rooted in his long-held false claim that widespread voter fraud, particularly by millions of undocumented immigrants, cost him the 2020 election. Again, non-citizen voting is extremely rare. It is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal and state elections, and courts have struck down or dismissed dozens of legal challenges by Trump and his allies that alleged widespread election fraud. The 21 million Americans who lack easy access to proof of citizenship are disproportionately younger and people of color, demographic groups that tend to vote more for Democrats than Republicans, according to the University of Maryland survey. But these things don't all line up perfectly, according to Party, said Sean Morales Doyle, director of the Brennan Center for Justice's Voting Rights and Elections program. Overall, the survey found slightly more Democrats, 10%, than Republicans, 7%, lack easy access to documents proving their citizenship, rising to 14% among political independents. This is going to impact people from all walks of life, from every demographic group, Morales Doyle said. And it may be that it disproportionately impacts Democrats, big picture, because of certain skews in the population. But it very easily could be that it disproportionately impacts Republicans in some parts of the country. This unpredictability is especially relevant as Republicans attract more male, working class, and first-time voters who tend to have lower educational levels and less access to documentation. Rural voters, a group Trump won by a 30-point margin in 2024, could also face a significant barrier if they need to re-register to vote, as voters who live in less populous areas have some of the longest round-trip driving times to get to their nearest election office. Indeed, certain slices of the data show that citizenship requirements would negatively affect men who supported Trump by a 13-point margin in 2024, and younger voters who also moved toward Trump in the last election. According to the survey, 11% more men did not have or could not easily access documentary proof of citizenship, which was slightly more than the 8% of women who said the same. Young men between the ages of 18 and 29 were particularly likely to lack easy access to those documents, the survey found. In subsequent surveys of adults in Georgia and Texas, the groups found that ready access to those documents varied. In Georgia, Democrats and Republicans lacked easy access to documentary proof of citizenship at the same rate. In Texas, Republicans were twice as likely as Democrats to lack easy access to documentary proof of citizenship. The surveys also tracked which adults lacked any kind of government-issued photo ID, as well as precisely how many people were affected by state-specific laws that required voters to present ID at the polls. In Georgia, Republicans were more likely to report not having a copy of their birth certificate at all, and in both Georgia and Texas, Democrats were more likely to have multiple documents they could use as voter ID. Republicans have long pushed to require voters to present photo ID at the polls, but only in recent years has a similar campaign for proof of citizenship exploded onto the voting policy scene. Republicans have long pushed to require voters to present photo ID at the polls, but only in recent years has a similar campaign for proof of citizenship exploded onto the voting policy scene, said Sam Novi, chief strategist at the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement at the University of Maryland. Novi cautioned that the partisan effects of election reforms are difficult to predict because so many other factors matter, including turnout, voter experience, and how the restrictions are implemented. But in general, requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote tends to negatively affect Republicans more than requiring voters to present photo ID at the polls hurts them, he said. In January, Michael Fregoso, former chief counsel to Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican, Kentucky, warned Republicans that adding restrictions to voter registration would not necessarily favor their party. Decades ago, when the Republican base was suburban, upper-middle class, high-propensity voters, making voter registration more time and resource intensive made sense, Fregoso wrote in the National Review. In recent years, though, these high-propensity voters have flipped their party allegiance. Republicans are accordingly more and more reliant on a multi-ethnic coalition of low-propensity voters in order to build majorities. These voters, Fregoso argued, have tended to sit out off-year and special elections and would likely not go the extra step of confirming their citizenship to go to the polls. What if they don't have passports? Who has passports? People with strong business, leisure, and familial connections overseas. Do we think they're eager to make America great again? Are they going to take the time and effort to attest to their citizenship, Fregoso wrote? What are the Save America Act's chances of passing? As it stands now, the bill has little chance of passing, even with Trump's pressure. Democrats oppose the bill, and the fact that Trump is making an explicit argument that Republicans can only win if they pass the Save America Act has only further alarmed voting rights advocates. It would take 60 votes to overcome a filibuster, allowing Senate Democrats to block it. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican, South Dakota, brought the bill to the floor for debate Tuesday, but has cautioned that it does not have the votes to pass. Some Republicans have pressed Thune to evade the filibuster by forcing Democrats to hold the Senate floor through continuous speeches to block the bill, betting that Republicans could outlast them. But Thune said he did not believe such a strategy could succeed because some Senate Republicans did not support it. Theodoric Meyer contributed to this report. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Washington Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the White House section. Judge questions Trump aide's brazen claims on White House ballroom. The planned $400 million project has been a top priority for the president. Judge Richard J. Leon said he hopes to rule this month on whether to halt construction. By Dan Diamond and Jonathan Edwards. A federal judge on Tuesday grilled Trump administration lawyers on the legal justification for the president's $400 million White House ballroom plan, accusing the Justice Department of shifting arguments as historic preservationists urged him to halt the controversial project. U.S. District Judge Richard J. Leon said he hoped to issue a ruling by the end of March. The White House has said it plans to begin above-ground construction of the ballroom in April. The project is a top priority of President Donald Trump. Leon repeatedly questioned the administration's insistence that the president does not need congressional approval for the project. The White House has countered that Congress set aside several $1 million for alteration and maintenance of the president's residence, a characterization that Leon said was brazen given the scope of the planned 90,000 square foot project. I'm struggling to see this as an alteration, Leon said later. The judge also grew frustrated after a Justice Department lawyer defended the project, which involved demolishing the White House's East Wing last year, by citing past projects at national parks, with Leon saying there was no comparison. The White House is a special place, he said. This is an iconic symbol of this nation. The judge added that Trump was a steward of the White House, not its owner. The National Trust for Historic Preservation, a nonprofit charged by Congress with preserving historic buildings, has argued that Trump exceeded his authority by demolishing the East Wing and soliciting private donations to build a ballroom in its place. They have asked Leon to issue a temporary injunction and pause the project until the administration receives congressional approval. The Justice Department has defended the project as within the president's authority, citing construction efforts overseen by past presidents, such as a pool built by President Gerald Ford. They have also said that any pause to the ballroom project could pose a threat to national security, although they have declined publicly to specify the risks. A presidential emergency bunker has been located for decades under the former East Wing. Yakov Roth, a senior Justice Department lawyer arguing the case, urged Leon not to issue an injunction and leave an exposed hole on the White House grounds. It does not benefit the National Trust. It does not benefit the public to have this White House site dormant, Roth said. Ted Hewer, a lawyer with Foley Hogue representing the National Trust, countered that the time has run short and that construction is set to soon begin. The imminent is now imminent, Hewer said. He also said that the Trump administration had forgotten the proverbial first law of holes. When you find yourself in one, stop digging, winning a chuckle from the judge and some attendees, which included dozens of National Trust supporters. Polls have found that most Americans oppose the president's planned ballroom. 58% of respondents said they opposed tearing down the East Wing to build the ballroom, according to an Economist YouGov poll conducted last month, while 25% said they supported it. Members of the public also sent more than 35,000 comments about the project to a federal commission reviewing the project, with a Washington Post analysis finding that more than 97% of comments were critical of the president's plans. Leon pressed the Justice Department on whether the National Park Service was playing a central role in the project, saying that Trump officials had repeatedly changed their stance on that matter. The National Trust has maintained that if the Park Service were overseeing the project, it would mean that the ballroom was subject to the Administrative Procedure Act, which sets requirements on agencies' actions. That law does not apply to White House projects. Roth said that the White House was continuing to drive the project and that the administration had not changed its stance that the Park Service was legally allowed to solicit gifts that could be used to fund the ballroom. He also reiterated that the administration's stance that Congress had authorized the changes by setting aside money for the maintenance of the White House and its grounds. This has always been a dual source of funding, Roth said. Leon has been skeptical of the administration's arguments in hearings, saying that past White House renovation projects are not comparable to Trump's expansive ballroom. The judge nonetheless sided with the Justice Department last month and ruled against an earlier complaint brought by the National Trust, citing procedural issues. The National Trust quickly revised its complaint. Ahead of the hearing on Tuesday, both sides renewed their arguments in dual filings, with the historic preservationists urging Leon to block the project before above-ground construction commences in several weeks. In the end, all roads lead to the same place. The defendants have no authority to build the ballroom, not even close, the National Trust's attorneys wrote in a court filing Monday. The defendants must halt construction on the ballroom unless and until they obtain the congressional authorization they should have secured long ago. Justice Department lawyers countered by focusing on procedural issues, arguing that it's too late to seek a halt to the project, particularly after the earlier complaint was rebuffed. The trust should not even be afforded another try at a preliminary injunction, the Justice Department wrote last week. The lawyers also invited Leon to visit the site to judge the project for himself. In his February 26 denial of the National Trust's earlier request, Leon said that the organization had wrongly invoked the Administrative Procedure Act to attempt to block Trump's project, finding that the law did not apply to the White House executive residence because it is not a federal agency. He invited the group to revise its challenge, however, and said he would promptly consider the amended request. The National Trust submitted its amended request the following day. Trump subsequently claimed on Truth Social that Leon had thrown out and completely erased the effort to stop the ballroom's construction, mischaracterizing the ruling. Trump has prioritized the project, saying that the presidents have long needed a permanent space to entertain VIP guests and that he hopes to hold events in the new ballroom before his term ends. The planned addition represents the most significant change to the White House campus in decades. The way the project is unfolding has raised questions about oversight and transparency. Democrats and watchdog groups have questioned whether ballroom contributors, including major corporations such as Amazon, Google, and Palantir, that collectively have billions of dollars in contracts before the administration, will receive special access or other perks in exchange for their gifts. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos owns The Washington Post. Some Democrats have acknowledged the potential value of renovating the White House grounds, but said the ballroom should be far smaller and should undergo congressional review. The National Trust sued the Trump administration in December, arguing that the ballroom project was illegal and calling for a pause until it could undergo public review. The White House subsequently submitted plans to the Commission of Fine Arts, a federal review panel that advises on major design projects. It approved the ballroom on February 19. The National Capital Planning Commission, another review panel, is set to vote on the project on April 2nd. Trump has packed both panels with allies, including his 26-year-old executive assistant. Attorneys for the National Trust have repeatedly focused on Trump's decision to solicit private donations, saying that the project needed express authorization by Congress. Rather than admit that none exists, the defendants invent a Rube Goldberg machine To justify proceeding with the project without express congressional approval, the National Trust attorneys argued in court filings in January. Leon, an appointee of President George W. Bush, echoed that criticism in a January hearing and again on Tuesday. The judge said in January that he expected the case to be appealed, potentially to the Supreme Court, regardless of how he rules. From the Mind section, 5 tips for when you're wide awake at 3 a.m. Middle of the night insomnia is common. These techniques might help. By Hanaud O'Connor. Do you ever find yourself lying in bed, wide awake at 3 a.m., tossing and turning, unable to get back to sleep? Tens of millions of adults experience insomnia, which can manifest in a variety of ways. But middle-of-the-night awakenings, where you wake up and have difficulty falling asleep again, are the most common symptoms of insomnia. Studies have found that as many as 1 in 5 adults in the United States and Europe experience this form of insomnia. These dreaded awakenings afflict people of all demographics. Studies suggest that middle-of-the-night insomnia is especially prevalent among women, and that it becomes more and more common as people age, affecting about 1 in 4 people 65 years and older. But it occurs among everyone from teenagers to 90-year-olds, said Michael Bruce, a sleep doctor and clinical psychologist who wrote the book Sleep, Drink, Breathe. It's the number one thing I get asked about, and it has been for the last 20 years, he added. I know this form of insomnia all too well. Most nights, I have no trouble falling asleep. I yawn, close my eyes, get comfortable, and within 15 minutes or so, I'm fast asleep. The hours pass by, and then, like clockwork, I open my eyes, look at my watch, and see it's 3 a.m. I close my eyes. I roll over and patiently wait for my brain to fall asleep again. But far too often, I end up lying awake as my mind jumps from one anxious thought to another. It can take an hour or two to fall back to sleep. There have been nights when I couldn't get back to sleep at all, and I ended up going about the next day feeling exhausted and sleep deprived. The 4-7-8 breathing method. I have tried many things to conquer my 3 a.m. awakenings. I've counted sheep, distracted my busy mind with psychological tricks, and tried reading boring books or listening to a soothing meditation podcast. But nothing worked until I tried a special breathing exercise recommended by Bruce, the sleep expert. The technique, called the 4-7-8 breathing method, is deceptively simple. First, you inhale through your nose for 4 seconds. Then you hold your breath for 7 seconds. Finally, you exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds and repeat the steps as many times as needed. The first time I tried it, I honestly expected it to fail. I was lying in bed wide awake at 3 a.m. and figured, why not try it? As I did the deep breathing exercise, I didn't feel myself getting sleepy, but I did feel calmer. Eventually, I opened my eyes and saw that it was 6:30 a.m. The sleep tracking function on my Apple Watch indicated that I had been asleep for several hours. I've now been using this breathing exercise on almost a nightly basis for over a month, and it works like a charm. When I do wake up at 3 a.m., I no longer get anxious because I know I can get myself back to sleep without much difficulty. Why we all wake up in the middle of the night. It turns out that there's nothing unusual about waking up at 3 a.m. Every person on earth wakes up between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning, Bruce said. For most people, it doesn't seem to bother them. They burp, they fart, they roll over, and they just go back to sleep. This is because of our biology. Our body temperatures follow a daily circadian rhythm, rising throughout the day and then falling at night. For most people, body temperature peaks and then begins to decline around 10 p.m. This shift in temperature is a signal to your brain to release the hormone melatonin, which tells your body that it's time to sleep, Bruce said. Your body temperature continues falling gradually throughout the night and begins to rise again between 1 and 3 a.m. During this time, your body moves into a lighter stage of sleep, causing us to wake up. But while most people fall back to sleep without even realizing it, about 10 or 15% of people do not, he said. Instead, they look at the time, their minds begin to wander, and they get anxious. They may even pick up their phones and start scrolling social media or get out of bed and use the bathroom. All of this can cause your heart rate to rise and activate your sympathetic nervous system, which controls your fight or flight response. To get back to sleep, you need to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, which relaxes your muscles and slows your heart rate, Brees said. This is where the 4-7-8 breathing exercise helps. Based on an ancient yogic technique called pranayama, it was popularized by Andrew Weil, a doctor and author who founded an integrative medicine center at the University of Arizona. Studies suggest that the 4-7-8 technique and other breathing exercises facilitate sleep because they slow your heart rate, lower your blood pressure, and reduce anxiety. A study published in the journal Frontiers in Sleep last year reviewed 6 trials and found that breathing exercises improve sleep quality in people with insomnia and other sleep difficulties. There's been generally good evidence from randomized controlled trials showing that breathwork helps with insomnia, said Melissa Young, a clinical assistant professor at the Cleveland Clinic and a staff physician at the clinic's Center for Functional Medicine, who was not involved in the study. The 4-7-8 breathing technique is both personally and professionally one of my favorites. What to do at 3 a.m. If you find yourself wide awake in the middle of the night, don't panic. You need to keep your heart rate low to fall asleep again. Don't look at the clock and don't elevate your heart rate unless you need to, Bruce said. Here's what to do. Don't look at your smartphone. The blue light it emits can trick your brain into thinking that it's time to get up and start your day. If you absolutely have to keep your phone in your bedroom, then at the very least, don't keep it near your bed. I plug my phone in across the room, Bruce said. You should also avoid looking at your smartphone in the hour or so before you first get into bed, according to Young at the Cleveland Clinic. That will help ensure a better night of sleep. The blue light that your phone emits suppresses your melatonin production, she said. You might be tempted to get out of bed and go to the bathroom, but try not to, as this will raise your heart rate, making it harder to get back to sleep, Bruce said. In most cases, people don't really need to go to the bathroom, he added. About 70% of people are side sleepers, and that puts pressure on your bladder, which makes you think you have to pee. Instead, Bruce said, try rolling onto your back and counting to 30. If after 30 seconds you find that you really do need to use the bathroom, then by all means do it. But if you don't, then it's best to stay in bed. As you're lying there, start doing the 4-7-8 breathing exercise. Try not to breathe in or out too forcefully. Instead, breathe in and out gently. Bruce recommends doing 20 rounds of the 4-7-8 breathing. You can keep count by lightly balling your hand into a fist and sticking out a finger after each round. Another thing you can do at the same time as the 4-7-8 breathing exercise is progressive muscle relaxation. Tense a part of your body for 5 seconds, like your calves, feet, arms, or shoulders, and then release the tension and move on to another body part. This reduces stress and anxiety, which can help alleviate insomnia, Bruce said. Something else that helps with insomnia is cognitive shuffling. This mental exercise helps you generate random thought patterns to distract you from anxious thoughts that interfere with sleep. You can learn more about it in our recent story on cognitive shuffling. If you try these things and find that you still aren't able to fall asleep, don't worry. One night of bad sleep isn't going to ruin your life. And Bruce points out that you can still benefit from what's known as non-sleep deep rest, the act of quietly lying in bed at night. It's not the same as sleep, but it can still rejuvenate you, he added. Occasional bouts of insomnia are normal, but if you find you're consistently having difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, and that nothing seems to help, consider seeing a doctor or sleep specialist. You could have an underlying problem or medical condition, such as obstructive sleep apnea. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Washington Post on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the Opinion section by George F. Will. The nation's accelerating self-assassination. The national debt is heading for $40 trillion. Blame total boomer luxury communism. The Ides of March came and went with less drama than in 44 BC, when Julius Caesar was assassinated. Nevertheless, 2,070 years on, there was a reason to beware mid-March this year. It marked another momentous, if mostly unremarked, moment in the nation's accelerating self-assassination. The Peterson Foundation says that on or about March 18, the national debt will reach $39 trillion. This was less than 5 months after it reached $38 trillion. At our current pace of profligacy, it probably will accelerate. $3 trillion milestones can be passed during one fiscal year. The Congressional Budget Office projects that in 10 years, the nation will annually be spending more than $2 trillion, 2,000 billion, just on debt service, which already is the fastest growing part of the budget. The national debt will exceed $40 trillion by the end of October, the Peterson Foundation projects. The debt has doubled in the 10 years since Donald Trump, on March 31, 2016, vowed to eliminate the debt in 8 years. He did not try, but if he had, he would have been stymied by this grinding political dynamic. The fastest growing age cohort is people 65 and older. They are high propensity voters because the more government subsidizes them, the higher are the stakes of politics for them. And because of their powerful incentive to vote, in order to defend and enlarge their benefits, the political class has a permanent incentive to intensify the elderly's incentive by enriching those benefits. Last year, the president's One Big Beautiful Bill Act increased the standard deduction for seniors, and only for them. Longevity is a social triumph, but in the context of increasingly competent and expensive medicine and an entitlement state, it can be ruinous, and it is regressive. It involves huge annual transfers of wealth upward from current workers to retirees who, after lifetimes of accumulation, are more affluent than their younger benefactors. Russ Green of the Prime Mover Institute, a think tank, has mischievously named what ails us total boomer luxury communism. Baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964 are, as he writes for the American Mind, the prime cause of the nation's fiscal dilapidation. He thinks today's political polarization is exaggerated, given the basic budget arithmetic. Almost 75% of federal spending, for example, entitlements, debt service, is on autopilot. The two parties fight over about 15% of the budget. 1974, when Gerald Ford became president, was the last year in which a majority of the budget funded discretionary programs that Congress actually, in theory, reviews. Hence the prominence of cultural issues. For example, biological men and women's sports in today's politics. Distributional conflicts, formerly the stuff of politics, are muted because of the entitlement state. Green calls it the retirement state, controls such a gigantic portion of society's resources. Green desires something that has long been forecast but that has not happened, more generational conflict. However, the boomers are organized, and there has not been a broader political awakening among younger generations. So boomers are serenely unthreatened as some of their households receive almost $117,000 annually from Social Security, and some Medicare programs cover golf balls, greens fees, social clubs, ski trips, and horseback riding. Kevin R. Kosar of the American Enterprise Institute says the 50-year, 1975 to 2025, average of annual budget deficits as a percentage of GDP has been 3.8%. Since 1946, that average has been surpassed only 8 times. 3 of those, however, were in 2023, 2024, and 2025. Thomas Jefferson said spending money to be repaid by posterity is swindling futurity on a large scale. There is, however, no injustice in borrowing from the future to fund public goods, those from which all citizens, present and future, will benefit. Such goods, physical, roads, dams, harbors, defense, and intellectual, education, scientific research, are the infrastructure enabling society's dynamism. The swindle that has become normal is perpetuated by generations in power funding their consumption of government goods by burdening and borrowing from future generations. This practice stores up risk. The higher the national debt as a percentage of GDP, the less leeway government has to respond to recessions or other economic shocks. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget says the government entered the last 2 recessions with the national debt at 35% and 80% of GDP, respectively. Today, it is 100%. If we have banished the business cycle, relax. If not, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, said the physicist Richard Feynman, and you are the easiest person to fool. And finally, from the opinion section, Americans brought a picnic to the Civil War. These videos are worse. War isn't entertainment. The White House should stop treating it as such. By Blaise J. Cupich. Cardinal Blaise J. Cupich is the Archbishop of Chicago. On a summer day after the Civil War began in 1861, civilians, including elites, politicians, and socialites, packed picnic baskets with sandwiches and cakes and drove their carriages to Centerville, Virginia to watch, some through opera glasses, what would eventually be known as the First Battle of Bull Run. They expected a grand pageant that would be over quickly. Instead, they witnessed the visceral, blood-soaked reality of war. As Confederate forces launched a counterattack, Union soldiers and panicked civilians fled back towards Washington. Their romanticized spectacle of a picnic battle had turned into a slaughter with nearly 5,000 casualties. More than a century and a half later, it seems Americans haven't truly left Centerville. They've simply digitized the view. That, at least, appears to be the position of the White House, which continues to post videos on its official X account that splices scenes from popular video games and action movies together with strike footage in Iran. In one video captioned, "Justice the American Way," bombing footage is interspersed with clips from movies including Iron Man, Braveheart, Transformers, and Gladiator. Another video captioned, "Undefeated," linked video game footage from Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort to bombing videos. All that's missing is Maximus, the gladiator, crying out, "Are you not entertained?" This horrifying portrayal represents a profound cultural shift in how people consume violence. No need to bring picnic baskets to the battlefield. Now the spectacle is on TV and in social media feeds, turning war from a somber last resort into a high-definition commodity that trivializes human suffering and numbs the moral imagination. Thermal lenses and crosshairs have replaced the opera glasses of yesteryear. The enemy is reduced to pixelated heat signatures on a screen to be struck before they disappear. Such visual language strips away the humanity of targets, turning life and death decisions into a sequence of successful data inputs. But it dehumanizes the spectator too. With the psychological buffer it creates, the violence can be consumed without feeling the weight of the carnage or the burden of empathy for those who suffer. Even more insidious are the prediction markets that allow for wagering on geopolitical conflicts. These new platforms treat the start date of a war or the effect of an invasion as it sets odds to be wagered on, and the displacement of millions as a market fluctuation. As a dollar value is assigned to the probability of a missile strike, players are incentivized to root for a profitable outcome rather than peace, moving them beyond spectatorship to ghoulish participation. When people treat war as entertainment, they surrender their humanity. When they allow their consciousness to be dulled by the allure of easy profit, they step away from what God desires for his children. When they stop seeing others as human beings and reduce them to pieces in a geopolitical game, they lose moral compass required to prevent future conflicts. The spectators at Bull Run learned the hard way that war is not a show. Today, as people watch global tragedies unfold on their phones, they must resist sliding into that same apathy that plagued the picnickers at Centerville. According to the Pentagon, at least 13 U.S. troops have been killed and hundreds injured since the current Middle East conflict began. Estimates of the total number of people killed exceed 2,000. The UN Refugee Agency reports that more than 650,000 people have been displaced in Lebanon. This is not a game. The lives lost, the bodies maimed, and the families displaced are tragedies and must be seen that way. Doing so requires people to reclaim their conscience and their humanity, and that begins with recognizing that on the receiving end of those missile and drone strikes are not video game characters or action movie villains, but actual human beings, just like themselves. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 18th issue of the Washington Post. Your reader has been Cheryl. Thank you for listening.